Great. I just want to say thank you very much for being here tonight at Products That Counts. I know there's a Mariners game tonight and some other things going on, so I know traffic can be a bit difficult getting downtown. So thank you for being here. My name is Ann, and I'm the chapter head for Seattle. Products That Counts that was founded in 2014 by a woman named Essie Modi. And what she wanted to do was build a global network of product managers and innovators in the world. And so we have execs from leading technology companies and sharing unique content every single month. And we're really lucky to have Scott Porad, CTO of Rover, here tonight. And we're excited about that. We also want to thank our sponsors that are here. And we have Amplitude and also Particle. And I also want to introduce Zilla, but before we do, can I have you for just a moment to talk a little bit about what Particle is?
Yeah, actually. So I'm Lauren from Particle, and we're a data platform. So we help manage identity strategy for companies like Airbnb and Spotify.
Great, thank you. And yes, that is a reminder. We are recording this, so when we get to Q&A, I'll be running over with the microphone, and if I forget, then somebody will, and we'll get to that. But also, I want to thank Zilla very much for the food in this facility. So a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Ann. I'm Justin. I manage our growth product development teams here at Zillow. I'm super excited to hear Scott. I was at Rover's offices a few months back. I walk in the front door, and there was just a pack of dogs just ran by me. There was in all shapes and sizes, right? Like a giant dog and a really small dog. And then one of them was a leader, and they were just sort of running around the office freely. It was amazing. So I'm excited to hear more about Rover. I work at Zillow. We're hiring. If that's not obvious, we're hiring. We have a couple recruiters here with us. And I'm also happy to answer any questions. But we're hiring all up and down the stack. So developers, product managers, product strategy folks, marketers. So if you're interested in a job or you just want to learn more about what Zillow's doing, we started buying houses. We announced we bought a mortgage company. We want to initiate mortgages. We're doing a bunch of really exciting things in the real estate market. So if you want to learn about that or just want to talk about getting a job, come talk to me or someone over there. Thanks, Ann.
Great, thank you. And if you have a house, then you have a place for a dog. So I want to introduce Scott, and so I've actually heard a preview of this talk at Code Fellows maybe 2-3 months ago, and I thought it was outstanding. So I asked if Scott would come and present tonight, and he was kind enough to say yes, he would do so. And Rover is your 7th or 8th startup? Yeah. And he really is really well known in this area. Also a UW grad. I saw some other UW students here tonight. And you're the former CTO of Cheezburger, also worked at Drugstore, Do 206, and a number of other positions. Avid golfer. I know there's some others at the room, and also I saw that you have a blog site and Medium, so there's different ways to contact you as you go. But mostly, I'll just go ahead and cue up your talk. We have a little bit about Rover, but I'll let you go ahead and do that. But thank you, everybody, and we'll have some robust Q&A after this as well.
Thank you, Ann. So, Ann, I have to correct you on one thing. I am not an avid golfer. I was golfing this weekend, and my friend Matt, who I was with, said, I've never met anybody who loves golf and hates golf as much as you do. Because I hate that game, but I can't seem to stop playing. Anyhow, so as Ann said, I work at Rover, who has a dog. A lot of people have dogs. We help people find dog sitters and dog walkers, to make a long story short. And let me just give you a little bit of, I forget exactly the order these slides go in, so it's going to be sort of an adventure for both of us. Oh, this is about me, actually. This is the me slide. So let's see here. I went to the University of Washington. It's up there at the top left. My first job out of college was working for a guy named Seth Godin, who writes books about marketing. And then I went to work for a company called Small World Software. We made fantasy sports games on the internet in the mid-90s. And then I came back to Seattle and I worked for a company called Starwave, which was a joint venture between Paul Allen and Disney. And mostly what I worked on there was ESPN.com, which is pretty exciting. And then left there and went and spent 8 years at a company called Drugstore.com, which was health, beauty, wellness, and a full-service pharmacy on the internet during the first .com boom. And then I went to work at I Can't Has Cheezburger before Rover. That's my family in the middle. I got 2 boys and my wife, Lisa. And here's my dog, Oscar. Everybody, generally speaking, agrees he's the cutest dog. Love to ski. I went to every Sasquatch music festival except for one. And I really like books. My ability to buy books is greater than my ability to read them, so now I just take pictures of them. So Rover, let's talk about the Rover origin story. So Rover is a place where people find dog sitters and dog walkers and place for daycare and things like that. We actually just launched grooming in Seattle, so we now have dog grooming. And Rover started as a startup weekend project. Startup Weekend is a program, I think, all around the world where engineers and designers and product people come together and try to start a company over a weekend. And this is a group of people who got together that weekend. I think there's about, 8 or 10 people there. And this guy here, Greg Gottesman, it was his idea. He had had a bad experience with his dog at a kennel. And he thought, there must be somebody in my neighborhood who would watch my dog that isn't necessarily a professional dog sitter, but wants to do it. And then all these people kind of disappeared after the startup weekend, because that's kind of usually what happens. But this one guy right here, this is Phil Kimmey, he decided to stick with it. So him and Greg started this thing, and they picked up a third guy named Aaron Easterly, who became the CEO. And Rover believes in the unconditional love of a dog. Everybody should have the opportunity to enjoy the unconditional love of a dog. That's sort of the foundation of our business. And it exists to make dog ownership possible, to remove common obstacles from a pet owner's life so that dog ownership is more possible. This was our first office. This is actually my first day. I took this picture on my first day. We had a meeting at 9:30 every morning. And what happened at that meeting is, I love this picture because of this piece right over here. Everyone loves, Etsy and like authentic and handmade and stuff. We had handmade business intelligence over there. This guy right here, he would run a query to get some data, and then he would go draw it up there to tell us like how business was the previous day. But it was how we stayed focused on some key metrics to keep the whole team having their eye on the ball. And so we have a website. You can come in here. You can search to find dog boarding or house sitting, drop-in visits, etc. We got a mobile app. It shows you search results on a map. So here's a picture of Seattle, probably searched for near our office or something like that. I'm not sure where that search was. And here's where we are now. We're the #1 pet sitting and dog walking app in the UK, in the North America. We launched in the UK this summer. And we hope to expand across the rest of Europe soon. We have about 10,000 cities, 200,000 sitters and walkers. People are generally happy. Like Zillow, we're hiring a lot of people right now. And we have about 60 dogs in our office every day. A very pet-friendly culture. Like Justin was saying, we've got big dogs and little dogs and all types of dogs. All right, so that's a little bit about myself and a little bit about Rover. And what I really want to talk about today is something called implementation plans. So the title of this talk is something like how to fail less often with a little bit of upfront planning or a little bit of upfront design. And, pardon me. We use a technique at Rover called implementation plans. It's an engineering technique, but it really affects our product managers, our engineers, to some degree, our designers. And, so other companies might call it a tech spec, other kinds of things, but sort of think about it this way, which is it's your plan for implementing something. So somebody somewhere comes to you. I guess I should ask, who in the room is a product manager? And then who's an engineer? A few engineers, okay. And what's everyone else? Got designers in the room? Or is there some students? Who are the students? Go dogs, okay. So, all right, so someone comes along to the engineer and says, I want you to make this thing, right? They might, say it in the hallway. They might write a spec. It could come to you a lot of different ways. And the implementation plan is how we do it. And I encourage our engineers to take a minute to write down how you're going to actually implement this thing. And it's a really good check and balance for like, okay, this is what I heard you say you wanted. Is this actually what you want? And it solves a lot of problems up front. And encouraging people to write implementation plans isn't sort of the thrust of this talk. Well, actually, it's about when is sort of the thrust of this talk, and I'll get to that in a minute. I forgot I put the slide in here. So why do it, right? Why do we do this at all? Well, the goal of all these plans we kind of create is to create a shared understanding between the requester and the people building it. Whether you're building a house and you have an architect who takes your plans for like, I want 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and so forth, or whether you're building software. So for us, for a software company, it helps us understand if what we're building fits into our business outcomes, clarifies what we're going to build, what work needs to be done. It informs the story breakdown and estimation for when the engineering team actually gets into their detailed sprint planning. It's a mechanism for peer review that's less personal. It's not you and me arguing at a whiteboard about whether this is the right thing to do. It's a piece of paper, or in our case, Google Docs, where you can leave a comment. And it's not me being critical of you as much as arguing with you as me giving you feedback on how to make this thing better. And ultimately for the engineers, it helps ensure that we're making well-designed software, balancing all the different factors that go into well-designed software. And I'll take a minute to speak about the benefits of well-designed software. I'm a huge fan of investing in software design. It creates better quality products that are less error prone and more robust. You can make things faster because your code is more flexible and less resistant to change. And it's more enjoyable to work with, so your people don't quit. So a key tool that we use at Rover to ensure that we're designing things well is stopping for a minute, writing down what are we going to build, and then having a conversation about it so that we know that we're building the right thing. Okay, so we're kind of getting to the meat of the matter here. How detailed should these plans be? And I have a 14-point checklist for you to tell you exactly how detailed these plans should be. Well, not to tell you how detailed they should be, but to tell you, they'll give you a guide for how detailed you should be. And but I'll give you some advice, which is one is to start small and iterate, show it to some people, refine some things, come back to it. And in my view, more detailed is always a little bit better. You're going to surface more issues and more things that were unclear by writing more down than less. Okay, so let's jump into that 14-point checklist. Oh, before we go into the 14-point checklist, 14 points on a PowerPoint slide is kind of monotonous, so I thought I would start us out with a little comic relief. We have some core values at Rover. You can go look at them on our website. I guess they're on our jobs page technically. But this dog, one of our core values is action not intimidated by failure, and this dog has exemplified that. Okay, so the deal with this checklist is the more things you check off on the list, the more detailed your planning should be. If you don't check anything off, then just turn to your neighbor and say, this is what I think I'm going to do here. Do you think that sounds like a good plan? And they'll say, yeah, that's a good plan. The more things you start to check, the more thorough you need to be. You need to go from talking to your neighbor to maybe making a bullet point list to writing a pretty thorough document about whatever you're building that you circulate around to a lot of people. So that's what this checklist is all about. They're all red flags for how thorough should I be in this planning. And there's no particular rule or threshold. They're just signals to somebody that, maybe we should think this through a little bit. And they can be signals to the engineer or to the product manager to request that or demand that of the engineer that they actually go through and do this. All right, so number one, so easy one. Is it a situation where the requirements are clear, unclear, or in flux? Has anybody ever been in a situation like that before? Yes, of course. Well, actually only 2 people have been. I don't believe you. So writing it down is just a good way to force or surface the areas where it's unclear. Number 2, does the change touch an area with many use cases? That's just a recipe for errors when you're going in and touching some code that does a lot of different things. An example might be like the form we have where you add a credit card, where you can add different types of credit cards and it validates it in a bunch of different ways and so on and so forth. If you're going to go change that thing, it might be a good idea to take a minute and write something down about it. Even if there are just a few use cases, are they tricky? Right? This is one that can really trip you up, which is, the only use case for a credit card, I suppose, is just entering the credit card. It's not that tricky of a use case, but the actual what the user does isn't all that tricky, but what can happen in that little form or that little component can be tricky. Oh, this is one of my favorites, actually. Is it a story or a project where reasonable people frequently use the same words to mean different things? I have a really good example of this, but I'm just going to ask you, does anybody else have an example of this? I'll start off to get the juices going. Facebook integration. Hey, we need to integrate our app with Facebook. Really? What does that mean exactly? Like Facebook login, like sharing to Facebook, like getting the friends on Facebook so we can message your friends that you signed up for this app. Like that could mean a lot of different things where somebody just says like, we need Facebook integration. You're going to say something over here.
Yeah, much more minute, but our customers say something
Means anything you want it to mean. There you go. Anybody else have one of those in their world? I'm sure you can imagine one. So this is always a red flag to me when I hear people using words that, like, okay, that could mean anything. Let's drill into that. This is an easy one. Is it a big change, either lots of code or many parts of the system? So we've been internationalizing our website to expand to more countries, which is touching every part of our system so that we can have multiple languages. It's a big red flag for us. Is it a change that involves changing a database schema or a data migration? Well, lots of times that isn't very risky, but it's a change to your database or one of your databases can be, it's a more risky operation than just introducing new code, and it can, especially when you are deploying, and can cause a problem, and it's a signal that you should maybe plan that out. Well, this is another good one. Is it a change that expands the technology footprint by introducing new technologies or additional infrastructure or third-party integrations? Philosophically, at Rover, we try to keep our technology footprint as small as possible and as tight and as homogeneous as possible. My grandmother, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but she had a saying which was, everything you own is a responsibility. And so every type of software you have, every system you have, every third-party component you rely on, that's a thing you have to be responsible for. You have to maintain it, you have to upgrade it, you have to understand how it works, so on and so forth. So we try to limit, or at least be very thoughtful about bringing those into our environment. This is an easy one. Is it a change that requires cross-team coordination to deliver, right? So we have multiple engineering teams at Rover. Actually, some of my team is right here. I should introduce them. We got Derek, who leads our design team, and then Ben, who's on our internationalization team, and Sawyer, who's on our machine learning team. And I think Ben was saying we have 23 teams on 17 engineering teams at Rover. And so if there are two or more teams that are having to do something, it's useful to sort of write down what you're going to do so that everybody's singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. Oh, this is a good one. This is a real red flag for me. Is it a change that is being rushed through urgently? To me, like that's all I need, actually, because when that happens, it's like, all right, let's just take a minute and write this down. Because almost every time something's being rushed through thoroughly, urgently, it is not being thought through thoroughly. And we're just playing the whack-a-mole game, and we're trying to solve one thing and just making other problems. So this is a kind of a bright light for me when that happens, is almost always like, let's just stop for a beat and put pencil to paper, or at least dry erase marker to whiteboard, and like write down what we're going to do here to make this thing happen. Oh, that's another fun one. Is it a change that seems easy because it's just dusting off some old code? There's like never dusting off some old code. First of all, code doesn't get dusty. It's in a computer. And it never works the way you thought it worked. Maybe once it did, and that was amazing, but typically it just never does. And so this is a real good signal to say, okay, there's probably more work here than I think there is, and I probably need to do a little bit of investigation to try and understand what's going on. Of course, is it a change that might create hard to see errors? If you're doing something visual on a website or in a mobile app, it's usually pretty easy to see if it goes wrong. If you're doing something on your back end or with one of your algorithms or in other types of areas like that, it might be much easier to not see if there's a problem that you created. And it's worth taking a minute there to think about. In fact, we were just talking about this today on our team at 4 o'clock. As part of your plan, part of it is thinking about, okay, how will I know if this didn't work? Right? Do we have the monitoring in place, or is there data that I'll query? What user experience might change, et cetera. And thinking about that in advance is a good way to ensure that you don't have a problem after the fact. Are there many people dependent on the system so that it could sort of create a lost in translation or telephone game? So you change some data, and you know what that data meant, or you know what that field meant, and all of a sudden other people in your company don't understand what this means, or they think they understand what it means, but it doesn't mean what they think it means. And then they're making bad decisions. And so this is a good opportunity to write that down as well. This is another the urgency thing is a really easy red flag because someone's there saying, we have to do this right now. And it's like, okay, that's a red flag. But this is sort of like a subtle red flag, which is, do you have a change that different people are asking for, have competing requirements? I kind of have a funny story about this one. Well, it's not funny. Haha, it's funny, sad. We had a feature on our website called the Sitter Scorecard. We're on our 3rd version of the Sitter Scorecard now, so this was back, I think, in the 2nd version. And there just were 2 different groups that wanted this thing. Our Sitter Success team wanted it so that they could provide sitters coaching for how to improve. And our Marketplace Management team wanted it so that sitters would see how they were performing on their scorecard and have an incentive to perform better. And it was a project that, honestly, should have taken 2 weeks. Maybe the design and planning should have taken a little bit longer, but the engineering just wasn't that hard. And it ended up taking about 5 months. And the reason it ended up taking about 5 months is because we had 2 different sets of stakeholders here that wanted different things out of this. And so it's kind of a tug of war. Like every time you had sort of a version or a release candidate and you're ready to do it and you showed it off to people, they were like, well, that's not what we want. We want to change it like this. And it would get tugged this way a little bit, and get tugged this way back a little bit. And we ended up with something mediocre in the middle, which didn't meet anybody's needs really, which is why we moved on to another version of it. But this ends up being a pretty good signal, which is like, hey, maybe we need to sort of put pencil to paper here and make sure that we actually know what we're trying to build. This also, by the way, is like one of the hardest things to unwind, because you kind of have to tell one of those groups of people, we're going to do this one first, and then we'll come back and do your thing later. And in a world where people are competing for resources, that is often a hard message to deliver and get people to buy into. But it's really a way to avoid having your project be unsuccessful, is to not load multiple goals onto it at the same time. And the last one also is an easy one, and we do this all the time, which is it a change where you don't know what to do and you want some peer feedback? So this is how the process works a lot at Rover. Somebody will kind of write a plan. They'll say, this is what I've been asked to do. And here are 3 possible ways I could implement this, but I don't really know which the best one is. And they'll write that in a Google Doc typically, share it with the team. Sometimes they'll call a meeting and ask people to come together and give feedback. Sometimes we'll just share it with the team. And it provides a great tool or mechanism to synthesize a lot of different people's ideas for how to solve a problem. People maybe who you might not necessarily go to directly if you were just asking one of your peers or someone you work with for help. But and it's proven to be a really effective tool for us. Frequently, the outcome is none of those things that a person proposes, but some synthesis of many of the things. There's actually one other little piece here. It's maybe a 15th point. Actually, did I put the 15th point in there? No, I don't have a 15th point. I'm throwing in a bonus 15th thing on my checklist. There's this notion that often gets overlooked in software development. And it's what I'll refer to as the ROI checkpoint. And it's like this. Someone has an idea, the project gets chartered, it sort of starts going down the pipeline, maybe designs happen, a spec happens, I don't know what, so on and so forth. And then the engineers start to go build it, right? And then you're like 2 months into it, and you're like, wow, this is a lot more expensive than we thought it was going to be. The ROI on this isn't really very good. Like if it was going to take us 5 months to build this, we might have not done it, right? Well, having this beat in the process where you stop and kind of just review the plan gives you a great opportunity to say, well, is this worth it? Like, should we keep on doing this? Ben is working on a project. I don't mean to pick on Ben too much, but he's working on a project where we're doing that right now, which is project came down. We had some requirements we had to meet. He sort of spec'd it out. It's going to be like multiple months worth of work. And then some of the people on the engineering team sort of said, is this really worth this much time? You know, we went back to the product manager and started talking about it. And we're now having a dialogue about, well, you know, can any of these, you know, the thing you do when you need to scale something back, right? Can any of these requirements change? Can we kick some of this down the road and not do some of these parts? You know, various different things. But lots of times in my experience, when you don't have that checkpoint in your process and just everything steams ahead, then you get to the end of your project and you say, well, we wouldn't have done this if we knew it was going to take that long. And I think this tool, it isn't designed for that purpose, but it provides an effective stopping point to say, is this worth it? You might have noticed earlier in one of the slides about why you do this, as I said, it provides a useful tool for story breakdown and estimation, which is when an engineer or a team of engineers have gone through and planned out what they have to build, it gets a lot easier to say, well, this is actually the tickets I need to create or the stories I need to create and the work I need to do. It's a lot easier to estimate it accurately. The estimation accuracy in our team is something we track. So basically, you know, how long we think something is going to take to how long it takes. We have a variance of about 15%, which I think is pretty good. We could get to 100% perfect, like we're always on the money, but I don't think the extra cost and planning would be worth it. 15% is 6 hours. So it's like, if you say this is going to take a week and you're either done like in the morning on Friday or it has to wait till Monday afternoon, like I think that's a reasonable trade-off. It's a small enough amount of time where when you need to land something on a schedule because there's external dependencies, 6 hours is an amount you can make up, right? It's an amount you can work late to get done or work on the weekend to get done. 6 years isn't, right? So taking some time to just think about what we're going to build gives us a tool to estimate those things accurately, which in turn gives us a tool to say, is this worth it? There's one thing I didn't address in this before we kind of go on to questions, which is, well, how thorough are these plans? They really vary. Sometimes it's just a list of bullet points of like, okay, well, this is what I need to do, and here's the places in the code I think I need to change. Can somebody double check this for me and make sure I'm not missing anywhere that I think I need to change? Sometimes it's a very thorough, like, here are new classes and models and workflows that I'm going to be creating, and here's how I imagine all these pieces fitting together. Sometimes it's a 30-page document detailing how an entire new subsystem is going to work. It really depends on how much risk you think there is to it and how much kind of going through these different points, like just how much planning do we need to do here to make sure that we're doing the right thing. I don't think there's any right answer. It's more art than science, and it's an art you learn your way into. And the last thing I'll say before taking any questions, which was I started doing this myself just when I was an engineer, because it just made doing my job easier, right? I would sort of think it through. I would usually just write it on a notepad, like, here's all the stuff I need to do. But then when I went and sat down to code, it was much more sort of mechanical. I was just working through this list of things I needed to do. So I separated two parts of the job. I separated out thinking through the design and how to solve the problem I was being asked to solve from, am I writing the code properly and does it compile and so on and so forth. And for me, kind of being not a multitasker and the person who just kind of thinks about one thing at a time, it just made my job easier for what I was doing. And then we just built on that. It's been years and years been doing this, but sort of built on this to become part of our culture and something that, at least at this company, is part of our culture that we do that makes things go pretty well for us. So that's all I have. I hope you found this useful and something that you can take away practically and use with whatever you're doing. Of course, it can be applied to more than software development, right? It can be applied to building a fence in your backyard or I don't know what other kinds of things you're going to be doing in your lives, but you could use this kind of thinking through your plans anywhere. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions about this or anything else. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
Welcome. Oh, do we have a question box?
Let's get the question.
All right.
Ready?
All right.
So this is like your conch?
Yeah.
All right.
There's a microphone.
There's a microphone. There's a microphone. Oh, that makes it. Now this makes sense. Could you talk about how this fits into if you sprints or Kanban or what your process is, and like when does this activity occur?
Great question. We use sprints. We run 2-week sprints. Frequently, someone will put a story in a sprint, which is to write a plan for some subsequent sprint, or to refine a plan for some subsequent sprint. So we try to be explicit about that. How far in advance that happens varies, sort of based on the size of the project. But we try to surface that work and put it as a ticket on our board so that people know that it's getting done. Is that helpful? Yes.
Yes. You you showed earlier that you have all this matrix. So from your experience, what are some of the effective matrix that you use to make sure that you're on track going forward? So
I didn't catch the very first part of that.
Oh, you showed that you had matrix on a daily basis to measure your success. Mm-hmm. My question is, from your experience, what are some of the most effective matrix that you use to make sure that your team is on track, and how often and when are they usually useful?
So the metric I care about most is schedule or estimation accuracy. And the reason I care about that is, imagine if you had a crystal ball and you could see into the future and you could know everything about your team and your project. You could know when people were going to be sick. You could know when there was going to be a fire drill in your building. You could know all the different unknowns about your project that you didn't know. You'd be able to land like 100% on the button schedule accuracy or estimation accuracy, right? Well, so to me, estimation accuracy is this signal for like, well, how good is our planning? Right? If your estimates vary widely and you're like off on average by say 50%, well, it's just a signal to me like, hey, we need to have some more thorough planning around here. I don't think there's any right or wrong number. If I was building an airplane like Boeing, I don't know if I would want 100% schedule accuracy as Boeing, but there are places where you would maybe want 100% schedule accuracy because it's really important and it's worth investing in that planning. And there's companies like Rover where we're willing to take a little bit of flexibility because we think the trade-off, the ROI trade-off between more planning and accuracy isn't worth it. So that's from just managing the team. I think that's the number one thing to see how things are going. It's just a signal of a lot of other good stuff. Of course, if it's poor, it doesn't tell you what's not going well, right? It could be that your engineers aren't any good, or people aren't very good at estimating, or that the requirements aren't clearly defined, or that your roadmap is being randomized all the time. I couldn't tell you what the problem is, but at least it's a signal of things are going healthy. So that's important. The other thing, which isn't a metric per se, but that we try to be very good about, is to be really clear about what is the objective of the project and what are we trying to change. The guy who leads product management at Rover has a saying, which is, what will be true if we succeed at this? And thinking about a project at that level is helpful to the entire team, engineers, designers, everyone working on it, because it ensures that everyone's focused on the same thing and trying to do rowing the same way, so to speak.
How often do you check schedules?
Well, the question was, how often do we check schedules? We use Jira, everyone's favorite tool to hate. We pull the data out of Jira into our data warehouse, so we have it whenever we want it. Realistically, it's only fair to look at it every sprint, so we look at a sprint level. This is what we thought we would do and what happened. Practically speaking, I would look at it once a month, maybe every 6 weeks, because it varies, right? I mean, it isn't always perfect. Stuff happens. it isn't the kind of thing I'm looking at every day, but that's the nature of our business, which is we have a little bit more fluidity with what we're doing with our product. There are other types of things people might be doing, I don't know, manufacturing lines or stuff like that, where you need a much more precision with what's going on.
So you said you have 17 engineering teams. If after someone writes one of these design documents, how do you make sure the right people see it without having too much noise for everyone else?
Very good question. We have two mechanisms that we use currently. The first is we have a template that we use. It isn't super sophisticated template. It's just kind of what's the objective of this? What are the constraints? What's the sort of proposed solution? I can't remember. It's not very much on there. But one of the sections it has is sort of a checklist of like, who should look at this? So just a signal to the engineer like, oh, you know what? I should have the data team look at this, and I should probably have, I don't know, whoever look at this. We also have a channel in Slack where, so as an engineer, I might then proactively go reach out to that team. We have a channel in Slack where people post them so anybody can peruse them. And we also have what we refer to as tech experts or sort of subject matter expert channels in Slack. So a place where I can go to if I'm making a change. I used the credit card example before. So making a change to our credit card component, and we have a tech expert channel for payments, where is a place where I know people who know about our payment system. I can go reach out to get some feedback. And so we put it on the engineer. It's like your job as an engineer to go get the feedback, it's not somebody else is going to come and keep an eye on you. And I hope we've built the culture that has two parts. One is that people are giving that feedback, generously and productively and out of a helping place from the heart, as opposed to saying this sucks and it's terrible. And that I hope we've built the culture where engineers want to get that feedback because they want to do good work, and they feel like this is a way that they can do their job better, as opposed to just diving into code and coding themselves into a corner. One way in the back there.
Hi. So I'm a designer. I'm probably coming from this from more of a design perspective, but I was curious. I'm thinking I find myself in situations pretty frequently where I might have 9, 10, 11 things on that checklist I'd want to check off, but at the same time, requirements are kind of in flux, maybe because of user feedback or some business requirements have changed. And I'm just curious how you'd go about making a plan when, things are kind of changing and it has to be robust or not.
That's a good question. So how to go, I guess you all heard the plan, the question was in a microphone, but so I think it's iteration. We, in the software development world especially, we talk about waterfall and agile, and right, really the difference between a waterfall and agile is iteration. I mean, agile is just a lot of little waterfalls, right? If you do them real fast, you can iterate. So, you might do this plan and more requirements or new things come in and change, and you're kind of going in a circle, iterating on it for a little while until you get to a spot where you think, okay, it's time to go. That happens, like I was mentioning earlier, sort of on that ROI side, like I was talking about with the project Ben's working on. But it probably also happens on the design side too, either driven by ROI concerns or other types of concerns as well. So I think that any product development process that doesn't have built into it the notion that you're going to have loops at every phase, at the sort of initial planning phase where you're deciding what it's going to be, at the design phase, whether it's the usability design, sort of functional design, or the visual design, at the engineering phase. Like if the product development process doesn't have that in it, you're not really iterating, right? You're just really kind of doing a waterfall situation. And as a result, you can't adapt to those things very well. So overall, I think we've tried to build a culture that has as much iteration in it as possible. I'll give an example of that from way upstream. We have a process, we call them one-pagers. They're just project charters. Twice a week, we have a one-pager review. It's kind of the gate, right, where a product manager might bring a project one-pager multiple times to that meeting to get feedback until they kind of get it right. And then it sort of opens up to the next phase where it goes into the design phase, right? And where you can start to then have like another checkpoint, which is, okay, do we want to continue on with engineering? And like I was saying towards the end of the talk, the implementation plan gives us a chance to sort of have another iteration there and say, here's another checkpoint. These aren't formal checkpoints. It's not like we're at an agency where we have a first design review and a second design review and a third final design review and that kind of thing. It's more of an informal checkpoint where it gives people the time, the opportunity to actually say, well, wait a second, this isn't making any sense. All right, got some more questions up here front. And the cube is coming. You can throw the cube. That's the whole thing with the cube is you can throw it.
Okay, ready? Are you collecting feedback mostly from your tech teams? Because a lot of what you were describing, I actually ran an exercise today, and we usually do it as a Scrum team with design, with QA, all of the disciplines represented. Our PMs and our QA teams at least get to see firsthand what the requirements are going to come down and net out as, but it also gives us product and engineering teams to work together to provide the best solution given the challenge or the use case we're trying to solve.
So in this, what I've described here in this process is mostly the tech team because we're mostly talking about the technical implementation. We sort of have different cycles for the actual functional solution to the problem where product managers, designers, customer service people, et cetera, are involved to give feedback on that. This is sort of that next phase, which is like, okay, well, it happens in two different ways. I mean, sometimes these things happen in parallel, but let's just, for argument's sake, say it's sort of a waterfall approach. It's like, okay, you've now described what you want. Derek's given us a bunch of designs. The PM has given us a bunch of words in a document to say this. Now I'm going to go say, look, here's how I'm going to make this happen.
Who's involved in, you mentioned the one-page reviews. Is that a cross-functional review or so who's sort of?
That is mostly product managers at that meeting. I think it's a pretty open meeting, but it's mostly product managers.
They're sharing their one-pagers with each other to get them to this rate move. Okay.
They're kind of saying like, here's the problem I've identified. Here's what I think it's worth to fix, or this opportunity we found. Here's what I think it's worth to address. Here is, a rough estimate. Maybe they've already talked to the dev team, a rough estimate of what it might cost to address this situation. It's really maybe sometimes 2 pages is just like, let's have a checkpoint up front. I guess one of our philosophies at Rover is that, it's avoiding investing your engineering resources in the wrong things, where you kind of make a lot of the wins. You want to try to put all your engineering resources into the right things. And so it's worth spending time up front to just ensure we're pointing, because I'm not saying this very succinctly, so I apologize, but that sort of whole notion of ready, aim, shoot, we kind of spend a lot of time on the ready just to make sure we're aiming ourselves in the right place.
Sure.
Because it's pretty cheap, right? That's what I mean by pretty cheap is it's a product manager writing on a document, right? It's not code, it's not design. You haven't invested a ton of resources into building something that then you decide, well, this isn't what we wanted anyhow. And I think you can make it. Toss it up.
I think I can. All right, ready?
Just one quick question. Doing this requires a certain amount of discipline across the team, and was wondering how your success has been maintained as you've accelerated the pace of development. Some of the companies and the clients that I'm working with are going through, moving into continuous delivery and integrating DevOps, and so there's a lot of iterating going on, but it's not necessarily a lot of good iterating going on. There's not really, so fitting that time in for this is becoming more and more of a challenge that we've identified, and more that is on the design side probably than the engineering side, but having the discipline to do that as things accelerate to a pace where things just kind of seem to break down, and that more, we lose sight of this. Everyone agrees, like, yes, we want to do this, but maintaining that discipline in these accelerated cycles in a continuous delivery environment are becoming really challenging for some of these companies.
That's right. Maybe we've been lucky. We've actually had the opposite experience, which is as we've gotten bigger and going faster, we've relied on this more. So it's a little bit of the history of Rover, right? Our engineering team has doubled every year in the 6 years I've been there. So, the first year we went from 5 to 10. Everyone can sit around a table and talk about what they want to do. The next year we went from 10 to 20. We could still kind of sit around the table and talk about what to do. But when we went this year we started the year with 49 and we're going to end the year with 120. Like, you can't sit around the table and talk about what to do anymore. So we had to rely on this more for two reasons. One is so that we could have a mechanism to get feedback, but is we had so many people on the team who hadn't been at Rover for very long and didn't really know how our software worked. This was an effective tool as long as we're being kind and gentle in our feedback at actually training people. And so it became more of a necessity for us as opposed to a luxury that we could afford to throw overboard. I would imagine that if in the last year and a half we'd stopped doing this, like, our software would be the world's biggest ball of mud, because 2/3 of our engineering team has worked at Rover for less than a year. And they, I don't mean this in any disrespectful way, but they wouldn't have known what they were doing. They wouldn't have been familiar with the software, and we would have started just hacking on it, and all of a sudden we would have just had a big mess. So we've tried to lean on it much more. If I go back in Rover's time, say 4 years ago, the proportion of things that we would do where we actually spent the time to do this was much fewer, because we could just rely on everyone swiveling their chairs around and talking around the whiteboard for 7 or 10 or 15 minutes and kind of getting on the same page. So we've had the opposite experience. We've pushed it a little bit, but we've just, as we relied upon it and seen that it's been effective, it's been much more pull than push in terms of people choosing to do it as opposed to being forced to do it.
It does seem like more of an organizational culture thing where the difference between success and failure that I've seen is where it's more of a cultural buy-in on that. So I think
when I first showed up at Rover, it was definitely push. I mean, engineers there didn't do this. And so I would have to pick projects. I can think of one in particular when we launched our first dog walking and we had to make really big changes to our data model. I was like, hey, we're going to be living with this data model changes for like the next 5 or 10 years. So we have to take some time to figure this one out. And we still did it wrong, by the way. We had to clean it up. That's a funny little note there. But at least we didn't do it super wrong. And so early on, it was pushing, and it was saying, hey guys, we have to do this. Like, I've been to this rodeo before, and I've seen the mistakes that you make if you just start coding this thing up, and all of a sudden we have a mess. So at first it was push, and it was just force of will, and sometimes people wouldn't do it, and it'd be frustrating, and we'd make mistakes. And just as people got traction and had success with it, it sort of snowballed. I will speak to one other thing, though. You talked about cultural. It's all about culture, right? I mean, it's what in the workplace, to some degree, culture is just what people choose to do without being told to do it, right? And so whether it's writing tests for their code or making sure the designs work on different size formats, or just the effort that people go to, that's kind of the culture. And I have this philosophy, I mean, it isn't mine alone, but people show up to work on their first day and they look to the guy to the left and the person to the right and they say, so this is how it is here. Some people are going to always do crummy work, and some people are always going to do great work, and most people are in the middle and are just going to kind of adapt to the environment around them. And so it's that 80% in the middle where you have to be really intentional and make intentional efforts to set the culture so that people do the things that you want them to do. Otherwise, it doesn't take too many people, especially in the early stages, to change the culture to something that you don't really want, and then trying to get a group of 10 or 50 or 20 or 100 people to change it in some other way. I mean, getting people to change their behavior is like the hardest thing we do. I mean, software development's easy compared to that.
I mean, it seems a lot of it's been when the scale of companies change significantly, and then all of a sudden it's a big shift towards continuous delivery, DevOps, and everyone kind of seems to forget that. It's like there's so much focus on all the technology side of that, all the process side of growth and scaling, and that all gets lost. So,
that's exactly right.
It's what I've seen has been the success or failure in that.
That's right. Sorry.
Kind of going off the last question, what do you feel has been the best and the worst change that's happened at Rover since you began?
That is a hard question. I'll tell you the best change. I can get that one easy. In 2015, in January 2015, we reorganized our engineering and product teams. We had about 20 people between engineering and product at that time. And at the time, we were organized like a very traditional software organization. We were sort of logically organized, so people worked on components. We had a team that worked on the search, algorithm, and we had a team that worked on the homepage and a team that worked on different parts of the site. And we switched our model to be more business aligned. So we ended up with a team of people that were focused on sitters and a team of people that were focused on owners. And the result of that, and then those are cross-functional teams, engineers and designers and product managers and stuff. And each team had a goal, had business goals, right? Because they're sort of business-focused teams. So I don't know what the goals were at the time, get 100% more owners or double our sitter supply or something like that. But what it did was it got everybody on that team thinking about what we needed to do to sort of move the business ahead. The problem we were having before is there was nobody in the organization who was thinking holistically about how do I actually move this forward. And it not only produced really good results, like culturally it was really healthy, and it got people in every type of role, that proverbial, having the light bulb go off in the shower kind of thing. Like people were thinking about the business in a different way and like how to move it forward and how to solve problems for customers, as opposed to like, how do I just make my part of the software as good as it can be? Now, maybe this is, the other side of the coin. Maybe this is the answer to the other part of the question. What's the worst thing? It puts some real strain on the engineering team, because all of a sudden you have people on different teams maybe going and messing with different parts of your software. We have a two-sided marketplace, so we have owners and sitters and walkers, and lots of the pages on our site have to serve both of them. Or lots of the workflows on our site also have to serve both of them. And it's easy to do something that, say, makes it really good for sitters and then makes it worse for owners at the same time. So, for instance, we could just, say, hey, we're going to raise everybody's price by $10. That's great for owners. They'll make more money. Great for sitters. They'll make more money. But it's not that good for owners. It's probably not that good for the business either, right, because of how supply and demand works. So that created a lot of strain for the engineering team to have a lot of cross communication amongst ourselves and really rely on communicating between ourselves, because the cohesiveness of the software was no longer embedded in the design of the organization. And we see that a little bit in our software. It's why we've had to do things like emphasize plans like this. There's something called Conway's Law. Anybody familiar with Conway's Law? It's an axiom which says the design of your software will reflect your organization. And it's relatively true, and people are going to just build the stuff that are designed around how they're organized. So we've seen some of that in our software, so suboptimal design based around how the organization is built, and we've had to push against that. And it's an area we continue to kind of work on and invest in. But I think that for us, changing how people worked from I work on this piece of software to I work on moving this part of the business forward was transformative for our whole company. And it really aligned with one of our core values is focus on impact. I think it's one of our most important core values, which is, just do, as engineers, maybe designers and other roles too, it's a lot about productivity and doing more and more and more. But doing more of the wrong thing isn't worthwhile, right? So getting our culture really shifted and focused on like what's the right thing to do to move this ahead was really transformational for us.
Great. We have time for one more. Otherwise, great.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll be around for a few more minutes. Happy to answer other questions. And thanks for having me here, Anne. I appreciate it.
And I have a few things. So I learned a lot the first time, and I learned a lot the second time. So thank you so much again for coming. It was fantastic. We have a gift, Products That Counts.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. And tonight was recorded, which is why we were asking people to speak up, and it'll be visible online, and you'll have a copy as well. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who took time out of your evening to come to Products That Counts tonight. Really appreciate that. Can I have a show of hands? Who's Products That Count the first time tonight? Wow, great. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you again. We have a code, Seattle Friends, capital S, capital F, for 20% off your next attendance. So in October, we have a gentleman who used to be the former CMO for 2 product lines within Expedia, and he'll be talking about the paradox of choice, because he now has a startup that's aggregating what their ride options or transportation options here in Seattle. And then in November, we have actually Nordstrom's coming in because they're shifting to a digital experience, but they're also very customer service oriented. So we'll have Brian come in and talk about that. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for our sponsors, as always. And there's recruiters in the back of the room. We have the room for about 30 more minutes. Looks like we have some beverages still and some food as well. And you're going to get a survey with the NPS score. I'm really interested in the hard feedback. You know, this is great, start a little early. This is great, start a little later. Loved the bacon dip. The speaker was great. And then feedback for Scott as well. We pass it on. So appreciate your time there. And yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.